Welcome to Unmasked Fame, where we uncover dark secrets, stories, and conspiracies about the world's most famous celebrities and actors.
You know the saying, some secrets are too big to stay buried. Well, what if I told you that the biggest secret in music history has been hiding in plain sight for over a decade? We're talking about mysteries, unexplained evidence, and a trail of clues that will make you question everything you thought you knew. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, supposedly died on June 25, 2009. But behind the headlines and the tears, there's a story far more complex than the world was told. Get ready to dive deep into a web of inconsistencies, strange coincidences, and evidence that suggests the impossible. So many questions, so many unanswered details. Michael Jackson's death, or was it the greatest disappearing act in entertainment history? Growing up fascinated by the mysteries of celebrity culture, I learned that some stories in the entertainment world are so carefully constructed that the truth becomes almost impossible to separate from fiction. The official narrative of Michael Jackson's death has been accepted by millions, but when you start pulling at the threads, the fabric begins to unravel. From the moment the news broke to the suspicious circumstances surrounding his final days, there are details that simply don't add up. Even seasoned investigators and medical professionals have raised eyebrows at certain aspects of the case. The speculation and questions that have surrounded Jackson's death are as persistent as his musical legacy. Remember how quickly the media narrative shifted from his comeback tour preparations to his sudden demise? It happened so fast that many details were swept under the rug before anyone could ask the hard questions. There were lawsuits, conflicting testimonies, and medical records that painted a picture far different from what the public initially heard. Even though the official cause of death was established, it created more questions than answers about what really happened in those final hours. Let's talk about Michael Jackson, a man who spent his entire adult life under the microscope of fame, constantly surrounded by rumors and speculation. But there's more to his final chapter than just the official story. Behind the scenes, he was a master of reinvention, someone who understood better than anyone how to control his public image and create elaborate performances. When the news came that he had passed away, people weren't just focused on mourning, but also on the strange timing and circumstances that seemed almost too convenient. Some observers say Jackson was planning something that would have shocked the world, and his sudden death may have been part of a much larger plan. The question that haunts many is whether someone as calculating and strategic as Michael Jackson would really leave his legacy to chance. Throughout his career, he had faced numerous challenges and had always found ways to emerge stronger. He was known for his meticulous planning, his attention to detail, and his ability to surprise the world when least expected. Despite all the pressures and controversies, Jackson had always been a step ahead of his critics and his circumstances. He was also someone who understood the power of mystery and the value of keeping people guessing. Some believe that if Jackson had wanted to disappear from the public eye while he was alive, it could have made a profound impact on how we think about fame, privacy, and the entertainment industry. Jackson had been in the spotlight since childhood, and the constant scrutiny had taken its toll. But he never openly discussed wanting to escape from it all, at least not in ways that most people would take seriously. He once made cryptic comments about wanting to disappear, but most dismiss these as typical celebrity complaints about fame. Even though Jackson was charismatic and beloved by millions, he struggled with aspects of his public life that fans rarely saw. And that's understandable. Nobody would blame him for wanting some peace, but it seems like something was always driving him forward, like he had plans that extended far beyond what anyone could imagine. It's disturbing to think that he might have orchestrated his own exit from the world stage, but the evidence suggests possibilities that most people have never seriously considered. Michael Joseph Jackson was born on August 29, 1958, in Gary, Indiana. His father, Joseph, and mother, Catherine, raised him in a musical household alongside his 8 siblings. He had older brothers who had become part of the Jackson Five, and they used to rehearse constantly, turning their living room into a makeshift studio. He later credited these early experiences with teaching him the discipline and showmanship that would define his career. His childhood exposure to the entertainment industry gave young Michael insights into how fame and success really worked. Michael's natural talent was evident from an early age, and he quickly became the standout performer in the family group. He started performing professionally when he was just 5 years old, earning money and recognition that most adults never achieve. But then he joined Berry Gordy's Motown Records as part of the Jackson Five. When he was still a child, he was already learning the business side of entertainment and understanding how carefully image and reputation had to be managed. Once upon a time, Michael Jackson was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. He was the go-to person for groundbreaking music and innovative performances. He even showed his business acumen by negotiating deals that gave him unprecedented control over his music and career. When he got the chance to break out as a solo artist, young and full of dreams, Jackson decided to push boundaries that no one had pushed before. Some say he just loved creating magic and providing unforgettable experiences for his fans. His financially minded advisors later convinced him that owning the rights to music catalogs was the key to lasting wealth. I'm not exactly sure how many hours he spent studying the business side of entertainment, but by the time he purchased the Beatles catalog, he had established himself as one of the shrewdest businessmen in the industry. That's when he realized the true power that came with controlling intellectual property. He understood that the real money wasn't just in performing, but in owning the content that would generate income for decades. It didn't take long before Jackson got opportunities that transformed him from a successful performer into a global phenomenon. He was so innovative with music videos and live performances that MTV practically had to change their programming format to accommodate his creative vision. Jackson was still in his 20s when he released Thriller, and it became the best-selling album of all time. This early success led him to think about how to maintain relevance in an industry that was constantly changing. Not too long after, Jackson's influence extended far beyond music into fashion, dance, and popular culture. His moonwalk became as iconic as any song he ever recorded. Jackson got recognition from every corner of the entertainment industry, though he faced increasing scrutiny as his fame grew. The media attention was so intense that almost everyone had opinions about his personal life, his appearance, and his relationships. His public image became a constant balancing act between maintaining his artistic credibility and dealing with tabloid speculation. His business empire expanded rapidly as he invested in real estate, music publishing, and various entertainment ventures. Jackson's acquisition of valuable music catalogs, including songs by Elvis Presley and Little Richard, made him incredibly wealthy, but also created tension with other industry figures. Before all that success, though, Jackson had different priorities. He wanted to use his platform to make positive changes in the world through his music and philanthropy. One of his most significant moves was purchasing the ATV catalog, which included the Beatles' songwriting catalog, for $47.5 million in 1985. This decision not only made him extremely wealthy, but also gave him leverage in an industry where he had often felt exploited. He even expanded his real estate holdings with the famous Neverland Ranch, which became both his sanctuary and a source of controversy. Jackson was clearly thinking strategically about his long-term financial security and creative control. Even though questions about his personal life continued to swirl in the media, his business dealings showed a level of sophistication that many people didn't expect from a performer. His partnerships and investments revealed someone who was planning for a future that extended far beyond his performing career. Although he faced various legal challenges and financial pressures over the years, Jackson's core assets remained valuable and provided him with options that most people could never imagine. The world knew about his eccentricities and his reclusive tendencies, but few understood the extent of his strategic thinking. His relationship with fame was complicated, to say the least. It seemed he was constantly torn between craving the spotlight and desperately wanting to escape from it. Jackson lived a lifestyle that appeared glamorous from the outside, but was filled with isolation and pressure that most people couldn't comprehend. I've heard stories about his elaborate security measures and his tendency to travel in disguise, suggesting someone who had given serious thought to how he could move through the world undetected. There were reports of him using body doubles for certain public appearances and employing sophisticated methods to maintain his privacy. His interest in illusion and stagecraft extended far beyond his performances into his daily life. The complexity of Jackson's personality made it difficult for even those closest to him to predict his next move. Some people say Jackson kept his true intentions hidden and maintained multiple layers of protection around his real plans. In the entertainment world, he seemed like someone who understood the power of misdirection and the value of keeping people guessing about his next move. He had connections throughout the industry and the resources to accomplish almost anything he set his mind to. Jackson's relationship with the media was particularly telling. He could manipulate coverage when it served his purposes, but also seemed genuinely hurt by negative attention. His famous 1993 interview with Oprah Winfrey showed someone who was both vulnerable and calculating, revealing just enough personal information to humanize himself while maintaining an air of mystery about his private world. People close to him described a man who was constantly planning and thinking several steps ahead of everyone else. Maybe it's true that Jackson was part of entertainment's most secretive circle, those who understood that sometimes the greatest performance happens when the audience doesn't even realize they're watching a show. He continued to surprise industry insiders with his business moves and creative decisions right up until his final years. His financial situation in the years leading up to his death was complicated and has been the subject of much speculation. On one hand, he owned incredibly valuable assets that should have provided financial security for life. On the other hand, he faced mounting debts and legal obligations that created pressure to return to performing. This tension between his assets and his debts created a situation where dramatic action might have seemed necessary. The announcement of his This Is It concert series at London's O2 Arena was supposed to be his triumphant return to live performance. 50 shows were planned, which would have been an enormous undertaking for someone who hadn't toured extensively in years. The preparation for these concerts was intense, and those involved described Jackson as both excited and anxious about returning to the stage in such a big way. But here's where things start to get really interesting, and where the official story begins to show some cracks. The rehearsals for the This Is It concerts were shrouded in secrecy from the very beginning. Members of the production team signed unusually strict non-disclosure agreements, and access to rehearsal footage was tightly controlled. Those who were present described Jackson as someone who seemed to be preparing for something much bigger than just a series of concerts. He was meticulous about every detail, but also appeared to be documenting everything in ways that seemed excessive for typical tour preparation. What's particularly strange is how Jackson approached the rehearsals in his final weeks. Multiple witnesses reported that he would sometimes arrive in elaborate disguises, even to closed rehearsals with his own team. He insisted on having multiple cameras recording from different angles, claiming he wanted to capture everything for posterity. But the amount of documentation seemed far beyond what would be necessary for a concert tour, almost as if he was creating a comprehensive record of his final performances. The medical team that was assembled around Jackson during this period raises even more questions. Dr. Conrad Murray, who would later be convicted in connection with Jackson's death, was brought in under circumstances that many found unusual. Jackson reportedly sought out Murray specifically and offered him a salary that was far above market rate for a personal physician. The arrangement seemed designed to ensure absolute loyalty and discretion rather than just medical care. But Murray wasn't the only medical professional in Jackson's orbit during those final months. There were reports of other doctors, specialists, and medical consultants who were brought in for various purposes. Some were there to help with Jackson's physical preparation for the demanding concert series, while others seemed to be involved in more mysterious aspects of his health management. The coordination between these different medical professionals was complex and compartmentalized in ways that made it difficult for any single person to see the complete picture. The timeline of events leading up to June 25, 2009, contains several anomalies that have never been fully explained. Jackson's behavior in his final weeks was described as erratic by some, but others said he seemed more focused and purposeful than he had been in years. He was making unusual financial arrangements, updating legal documents, and having private meetings with people he hadn't spoken to in years. These activities could be explained as someone preparing for a major career comeback, but they could also suggest someone making final preparations for something entirely different. The security arrangements at Jackson's rented mansion in Holmby Hills were extraordinarily complex for someone who was supposedly just preparing for a concert tour. There were multiple layers of security, advanced surveillance systems, and protocols that seemed designed to control not just who entered the property, but also what information left it. Staff members were required to surrender their phones and sign additional confidentiality agreements beyond their standard employment contracts. What happened on the morning of June 25th remains one of the most disputed aspects of the entire story. The official timeline provided by Dr. Murray and other witnesses has been challenged by forensic experts and medical professionals who point out numerous inconsistencies. The sequence of events, the timing of phone calls, and the physical evidence at the scene don't align in ways that would be expected in a straightforward medical emergency. The most puzzling aspect of that morning involves the 911 call itself. Dr. Murray claimed he discovered Jackson unresponsive around 11 a.m., but the emergency call wasn't placed until 12:22 p.m. What happened during that missing hour and 22 minutes? Murray's explanation involved CPR attempts and phone calls, but phone records and witness testimonies create a timeline that simply doesn't match his account. Even more suspicious, the CPR was allegedly performed on Jackson's bed, which any medical professional knows is completely ineffective due to the soft surface. The paramedics who responded to the scene reported finding something that didn't look like a typical medical emergency. The room was unusually organized, almost staged, with personal items arranged in ways that seemed deliberate, rather than the chaos you'd expect from a desperate attempt to save someone's life. Medical equipment was present that wouldn't normally be found in a bedroom, and some of the medications discovered were in quantities and combinations that raised immediate red flags. When the coroner's investigation began, several pieces of evidence emerged that contradicted the initial reports. The autopsy revealed levels of propofol that were described as lethal, but also showed other substances that created a cocktail so specific and unusual that it seemed almost impossible to have occurred accidentally. Forensic experts noted that the distribution of these substances in Jackson's system suggested a timeline that didn't match the official story of when they were supposedly administered. But perhaps the most intriguing piece of physical evidence was what wasn't found at the scene. For someone who was reportedly struggling with insomnia and anxiety, there were surprisingly few of the typical medications you'd expect to find. Instead, the pharmaceutical evidence suggested someone who had been preparing for a very specific medical procedure rather than someone dealing with chronic health issues. The immediate aftermath of Jackson's death was handled in ways that many found suspicious. The family's response, the speed with which certain legal and financial matters were addressed, and the coordination of public statements all seemed remarkably organized for people who had just experienced such a traumatic and unexpected loss. It was almost as if contingency plans had already been put in place. Within hours of the death announcement, there were reports of unusual activity at several of Jackson's properties. Security teams were deployed. Certain areas were sealed off from investigators, and valuable items were allegedly moved before authorities could catalog them. This level of organization and rapid response suggested preparation that went far beyond normal estate management. The financial implications of Jackson's death were immediately apparent and extraordinarily beneficial to his estate. His music sales skyrocketed, generating more revenue in the months following his death than his career had produced in years. The "This Is It" rehearsal footage, which had been carefully documented in those final weeks, became the foundation for a hugely profitable documentary and multimedia franchise. But here's what really makes people wonder about the official story. Jackson had been in financial trouble, facing enormous debts and legal obligations that seemed impossible to resolve through conventional means. His death immediately transformed these liabilities into assets, creating a situation where his estate became far more valuable than he had been alive. The timing was so financially advantageous that it raised questions about whether such perfect timing could really be coincidental. The insurance policies surrounding the "This Is It" concerts were another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. These policies were taken out just months before Jackson's death and covered scenarios that seemed almost prophetic given what actually happened. The insurance companies initially contested the claims, suggesting they had their own suspicions about the circumstances, but eventually settled for amounts that provided enormous financial relief to Jackson's estate. Then there are the sightings. In the years following his supposed death, there have been hundreds of reported sightings of Michael Jackson around the world. While most of these can be dismissed as wishful thinking or cases of mistaken identity, some have come from credible sources and included details that are difficult to explain away. Witnesses have described encounters with someone who not only looked like Jackson, but also exhibited his distinctive mannerisms and speaking voice. One of the most compelling sightings came from a former security guard who had worked for Jackson for several years. He claimed to have seen Jackson at a private airfield just days after the funeral, boarding a small aircraft with several other people. The guard provided specific details about Jackson's appearance, clothing, and behavior that matched his memories from years of close contact. When investigators followed up, they found that a private jet had indeed departed from that airfield at the time specified, but the flight records had been sealed by federal authorities. There have also been reports from international locations where Jackson had previously owned property or had business connections. These sightings often come from people who had no apparent motive to fabricate such stories, and who provided details that weren't widely known to the public. The consistency of these reports, spanning different countries and cultures, suggests either an elaborate hoax involving multiple participants or something more substantial. The technology available to Jackson could have made such a disappearance possible. He had access to the best special effects artists in Hollywood, makeup experts who specialized in creating realistic disguises, and financial resources that could have supported an elaborate deception. His interest in illusion and stagecraft, combined with his business acumen, would have given him the knowledge and connections needed to orchestrate something unprecedented. But the most convincing evidence might be the pattern of behavior that Jackson exhibited in his final years. His increasing reclusiveness, his use of body doubles, his sophisticated security arrangements, and his tendency to plan far in advance all suggest someone who was preparing for a dramatic exit strategy. The pieces were already in place for someone who wanted to disappear completely from public view. Consider also the legal and financial benefits that Jackson's death provided to everyone in his inner circle. The estate's executors, his family members, and various business partners all found themselves in significantly better positions after his death than they had been before. The concert promoters, who would have faced enormous losses if the shows had been canceled due to Jackson's health problems, instead received insurance payouts and profitable documentary deals. The official investigation into Jackson's death focused primarily on Dr. Murray's actions and the circumstances of that final morning, but it never seriously examined the broader question of whether the death could have been staged. The focus remained narrowly on medical malpractice, rather than the possibility of an elaborate deception involving multiple participants and carefully planned logistics. What's particularly interesting is how quickly the case was resolved through the legal system. Dr. Murray's conviction provided closure to the official narrative, but it also ended the most detailed investigation into what actually happened. Once Murray was sentenced, there was little incentive for authorities to continue examining the inconsistencies and unanswered questions that remained. The media's handling of the story also raises questions. While there was extensive coverage of Jackson's death and the subsequent legal proceedings, there was relatively little investigative journalism focused on the anomalies and suspicious circumstances. Major news outlets seemed content to accept the official narrative without seriously examining the evidence that contradicted it. So, where does all this leave us? The evidence for Michael Jackson having faked his death isn't conclusive, but it's substantial enough to raise serious doubts about the official story. The combination of financial motives, suspicious circumstances, credible sightings, and Jackson's own history of elaborate planning creates a picture that's difficult to ignore. Whether Michael Jackson is alive or dead, one thing is certain. The story we've been told doesn't account for all the evidence. The king of pop was a master of reinvention who understood better than anyone how to control his image and surprise the world. If anyone could have pulled off the ultimate disappearing act, it would have been Michael Jackson. The questions surrounding Michael Jackson's death reveal how much we still don't know about one of the most documented events in entertainment history. From the suspicious medical evidence to the convenient financial outcomes, the pieces of this puzzle create a picture that challenges everything we thought we knew about that tragic day in 2009.